think start with your product design rather than half an idea in 20,000 words. Start with a cover, start with a sales pitch like you would any other type of product design. Start with your one-liner, read about copywriting, because whatever type of writer you want to be, you are going to have to do copywriting.
I'm excited to talk to you. You've got so much experience. I can't wait to mine your brain for precious jewels.
I've literally never thought of myself as being an experienced writer before, so it's quite interesting to hear that.
I can factually prove you wrong by showing all of the books you have written. Like I have to hide behind them.
The evidence is mounting, yeah.
Patrick was introduced by one of the other members of the authors community, Ben, as a secretly super successful author. One of these successes that isn't being in your face or flashy about it, but has been carving out a career as a professional author for a long time. He has written a bunch of books, as you can see, including the most successful isn't even listed here because it was ghostwritten. But you can see with the Banksy book, 1,000 reviews. It's like a 4.8 star rating, insane results. And by Patrick's own admission, after getting a couple of big successes with his books, he got a bit overconfident and had a couple of flops. And now he's back in it. And his latest about how to write memoirs and life stories is on track to become his second most successful. You describe your career as an author with great humility and self-awareness. It's been a meandering path, as I think everyone who gets into the arts, the crafts experiences. Would you talk us through how it went for you and how you got started?
I was a drama and theatre graduate, and when I was at university, I went very much into writing. And in my last year at university, I did like extended dissertations and research projects and all kinds of things. That was really the first time that I started writing tens of thousands of words in a relatively short space of time. And I was terribly unorganized as a student, and I was often writing till 4 or 5 in the morning and learning to write and research at the same time and just generate a lot of content very quickly.
What was the jump from being able to put words down to starting to feel like you might be able to make a living from it?
Do stuff and talk about it, I think, was one of my first discoveries. And I think that when I first met my current publisher, it was directly as a result of I was just making stuff with friends, and other friends talked about it. And through that, I got introduced to somebody who offered me money to write. And that's something that was completely accidental. And it was the beginning of a long-term relationship. I'm still working with the same guy today. This is about 13, 14 years since that happened. So it really was a case of like, I was writing stuff purely for fun, but sharing that with other people. Like if you do stuff and talk about it, something will happen effectively.
It's something that so many of us struggle with in our group. We go, I want to write in public. Yeah, I want to share my work in progress. What's the way that you were putting yourself out there that felt honest and sustainable for you and created this serendipity?
We were doing some sort of like art happening in my flat. It was pure luck. I don't know how you could recreate that. Someone that happened to be there knew someone who happened to be looking for a writer. But then I talked my way into making the most out of that opportunity. When social media was new, I got into it. You know, I'm talking about MySpace, early Facebook, but then I rapidly got super disillusioned with it. And what I tend to find is I cannot be consistently interested in one thing for long enough to build a following around it. And that's still the situation now. Like, I think my mindset is always, I want the next, what's the next project? What's the next project? And when I finished writing my life story and it came out, we were like, well, this is the perfect book to build a social media platform around, isn't it? Now we can start engaging with people about kind of casual autobiography or autobiography for non-writers. It seemed like the perfect thing for a social media platform. So we built it, and we built the groups, and we built, started producing Instagram content for it. And I couldn't stay interested for long enough to build it.
It's a sentiment that I can empathize with very much. How do you think about your career path as an author then? Everyone says you got to have the platform. I didn't for my first 2 or 3 books. I'm starting to build it now. You've clearly made this choice intentionally, and you've found a lot of success. What would you advise to someone if they hated this style of marketing and they were at the start of their journey?
Well, I think what was interesting about reading your book was that you said this is an option, but it's not essential, which is rare. I would build a platform if I could find the right one. I don't think you should try and force yourself into being something that you're not on social media, because I think you're just creating misery for yourself. Like if you think about the Banksy book, a lot of the books that I've written, but especially the Banksy books, absolutely nothing to do with my author platform. No one who buys that book needs to know who I am in any way. They're buying the book because they're interested in that body of work, and my writing is adding value to it. But it's found that niche without me having to be the Banksy guy. Although there have been a few occasions where people have tried to make me into the Banksy guy and try to interview me in various different ways, which has occasionally been fun. But
it's sort of like the marketing is attached to the book or the product in that case, rather than the person. The Banksy book in particular is a very different category of book. Even within useful nonfiction, it's what design stores, museums, like coffee shops. It's something people see and they want. Is that right? How do you think about this category of book and how it grows and lives in the world?
If you looked at Banksy's search time, you would see that it's still just massive and way above and beyond anything else in the street art scene. Because we did several books about street art, but back in 2007, street art was a topic that a lot of people were interested in, but rapidly it became just Banksy. The Banksy kind of went over a certain line because he's the only street artist your grandma's heard of, sort of thing. And I think just the enormous weight of that interest means that people inevitably get to seeing that book somewhere. And it's in any cool bookshop in any cool city in the world, you'll find it. It's in all the gallery bookshops. You can go. Tate Modern sells a lot of our books.
I assume it was all handled by the publisher. Was that something that you had to go out and shake hands and arrange to get these museum distributions? A bit unusual, right? That's not like a standard book pipeline.
The beauty of this partnership is that I don't have to worry about anything except writing, not even really marketing. I could do a little bit now and again, but in most relationships that I see where a writer has a publisher, they are expected to do tons of marketing work. I get away with just doing the creative process and nothing else, which is pretty rare. And I realized that. And also, there's no way as an indie publisher I could put out hardback, full color books. That's an incredible feat, I think, to be able to do that and profitably. So I haven't had to do any of the negotiating or building the relationships with distributors or any of that, which allowed me to just think about writing and my day job.
Sounds brilliant. And when you shift to something like your latest book, which is more of a how-to, a guide, it's a very different category of book. Did you go into the creation process differently? Were you thinking about different stuff, or were you just like, trust the soup, I'm going to write what I'm going to write and it'll shake out in the end?
No, I think about creative process a lot. And there's almost like two different branches to my writing career. Looking back, these narratives only emerge in retrospect, but there was the kind of edgy but funny, provocative banter, not really as rigorous as journalism, mainly about subcultures and art that has been niche coffee table books for particular subcultures like fixed gear cycling and things like that. And then there's this other voice that emerged, and this was the publisher's idea. I think he got this idea from going to book fairs like Frankfurt, and he realized that this interactive category of book was going to become massive. I think in Waterstones they called it stationery, that included things like Breakfast Journal, probably one of the first big breakout interactive books that started establishing this area of publishing, which went massive. Apparently everyone was imitating it, and then the adult coloring books came out and all that stuff. So he saw that opportunity very early and got me on board, and we've done a lot of them now, and we're getting better at targeting them and structuring them and thinking about how we create them. I've just had several conversations with him today about how our particular approach for this particular book is different to previous books.
I know there's a complicated deal on these books because this one's been kind of a huge breakout success, hasn't it?
Well, I had no idea how well it was doing. So yeah, we did have an absolute smash hit success. It was a sleeper hit. Like, it took 4 years to develop really into a seller, and then it's only in the last year, I think, just blown up into whatever it is, 147 on Amazon or something ridiculous like that.
Just by the number of reviews. Some of your previous books must have sold 100,000 copies based on the numbers. So it must be quite a ride to see how it's entered into pop culture. People are on TikTok making videos with this book, and you describe it as an interactive book. It's a workbook. It's a thing people are meant to use and interact with. And that's really become a part of the book's like recommendation loop, of its viral loop.
I think in our wildest dreams, we hoped that one of our books might go viral one day, but we never really believed it was going to happen.
The idea of workshop books in our little group, it's often making a personal development workbook, or someone wrote a kind of calendar journal hybrid to work toward a 90-day goal. Do you have any insights about this category of book or how to think about them? It feels hard to me, right?
What I liked about the success of this book is that it's not something that relies on the celebrity of another person. So it's kind of more validating from a writing perspective, because the writing is an important part of the way the book works. And it's not just a value add for photography, which you could argue that a lot of my books are. I don't want to make the same mistakes that I've made in the past, where you have one success and then you immediately assume that every idea you have is golden. And also, left to my own devices, my brain will go to some very strange places. So I'm learning to check back in more often. So write something and go, am I going off course? But I don't think this area of book production is going to get exhausted too easily. I think it taps into a kind of backlash against digital, for a start, the tactile effect of handwriting in a workbook. It's kind of like vinyl, it's obsolete, but then because it's obsolete, it's become something better than it originally was. Almost like using notebooks for ideas or handwriting are a nice break from swiping and tapping on screens. And I think that's a big thing to tap into culturally.
You don't even offer a digital version of it from what I saw. It's paperback only.
Yeah. It's meant to be like, once you've written in it, it's unique. In a world of infinite reproduction, you're then selling unique objects. there's magic to that. The second someone has filled in even half a dozen pages in that autobiography book, it's priceless from then on. Like, that could be an heirloom. And people are using it. And I did wonder if people really would, but I'm getting reports back that people are using it. And I think that's what's out there. People are building up this social history almost, these little objects that are going to be out there for God knows how long.
When I think about a workbook, people who hate it, they go, I read this and it didn't work. And it's like, well, did you try any of it? And they go, well, no, I didn't try any of it, but I don't think it would work. And what I love about the idea of just like books you have to write in is it's like, it's going to work for people. It's closing that gap between the theory and the practice.
In terms of you saying, well, how do you think about making them? Because they're odd. You're talking about iterative design, right? You're talking about the more iterations you can do on a thing, the better it's going to be. Well, if you're creating interactive content, you absolutely can test it at every stage. So in some ways, it should be easier to test and develop than other kinds of writing, because you're not just saying, oh, I wrote this, what do you think? You're saying, do this. And either they're going to do it or they're not going to do it. And that's going to tell you something. Or the way that they do it's going to be unsatisfying. So then you've got much more specific questions to ask. You've got to think you're not just creating a book, you're creating the process for creating a book. What you're doing is you're coming up with an idea for a type of book that maybe doesn't already exist. And then you've got to come up with a way of tying that into an existing need, because you don't want to be creating a market from scratch.
I'm getting so inspired by what you're saying, but I'm also slightly terrified of it because I feel like I'm going to have to rework the whole draft I've been working so hard on. What you're describing is such a perfect fit for what I'm working on right now. I'm like, oh no, it's so out of my comfort zone, but I might have to do it. So Tom had a question. You said you wrote with a co-author or a collaborator. I'm curious to hear how that process works.
It's really evolved over 20 odd projects over 15 years. So we've gone from like very early on, a brief would be about 3 lines in an email, maybe one conversation. And then 3 months later, I'd deliver 20,000 words without having had a single further conversation on it. And generally, there would be no feedback whatsoever at that point. There would be no editing process. It would just all go into print. That was how we started out. And it was interesting. I had a ridiculous amount of creative freedom and I wrote some pretty far out stuff, but it fit because it fit with the street art thing that we were doing, and it fit to do that way. So we got over the years, we've got to the point now where while I'm writing, I had 2 or 3 conversations, email chats during the writing process today. And we're really going back and forth on designing the workflow as we go along. I think it's even the pitching process is a back and forth thing. I think the book that I'm currently working on, I think it's the 3rd time in a row that we've started it from scratch. We tend to start with what we would call an AI sheet. It's generally 2 sides of A4 with title, tagline, one-liner, sales copy, and blurb, back cover. The kind of stuff that you would put together to put in front of a sales team or a marketing team pre-production, which is what happens now because we've got like a proper international distributor. So books that are going to be produced get pitched to them before they're even written, which I actually had to go at once, which is quite interesting because he couldn't make the meeting. So I had to go down to London and do the pitch, which was fun.
Did anything surprise you in that conversation?
They were lovely. They massively oversold to me, I think, what they were going to be able to do with the books that we were pitching. I think there's a lot of like, yeah, this is all genius. But, I guess that's how the industry works, isn't it? Everyone's as optimistic as they possibly can be.
Apart from the trust and the ease of collaboration and the long working history, I assume that with the era of print on demand and all of this, you go out and do books on your own, but you've chosen to continue working with your co-writer, partner, publisher. What do you see the value being that they bring?
See, I fully understand the appeal of self-publishing, and I have actually set up an indie label that I used to publish my mum's first novel. But for me, part of the reason that we've settled on working on this area is because we could get a book out from brief to getting it to the shelves in 6 months flat, which is quite rare.
Is that just because of the lower word counts when you're doing kind of worksheets and interactive stuff?
The longest coffee table book that I might write would be 30, 40,000 words maximum. They're generally more like 25, 30,000 words. So when I'm writing an interactive book, it's going to be generally way less than 10,000 words. I can fit that in between working full-time as a teacher and whatever else I'm doing. Just about. It's not easy, but I can fit that in. Whereas striking out on my own and writing a full-length book is something that I will do at some point. There's certain things that he's not interested in publishing. He's not interested in doing novels and things like that. And when I do eventually finish my first novel, I think I'll probably put it out as an indie rather than through a publisher. Most of the interesting things I've done in my creative career, whether paid or not, have been collaborations. I love collaborating with other creatives.
With Workshop Survival Guide, I co-authored it with Devin, who is my business partner also. And we had very different jobs on the book, but it helped so much to have both of us involved. I was kicking out these messy first drafts, and then he was bringing like organization and sanity and like BS checking. And it was a very different relationship than I've had with an editor, because with an editor, it's like these big chunks, right? And it was so nice to work in units of every day or even a few hours for an idea or a sentence. It was a very different flow. So if someone's starting out and they're starting to talk to either a publisher, co-author, collaborator, are there things to look out for, right? Because you hear all these horror stories of people getting like backed into contracts they didn't want, or like they can't get out. From your perspective, as someone who's been doing it for a while, is there, look out for this, don't worry about all this stuff?
Just be open to the fact that there are a huge number of non-traditional business models in publishing. And it's not just a question of indie or traditional pub, because there's lots of people involved who are starting things from other angles. So be a bit more open-minded about what kind of partnerships you're looking for, I suppose.
And also something you said, you get to choose your own difficulty setting, right? I was looking at children's books the other day because one of my friends, he'd written one for his kid and he wanted to get a few copies printed. And so I was looking into that. It's like 1,200 words. I'm like, that's a day's output. And I mean, I know there's more to it than that, right? But I was like, man, I'm in the wrong industry. Those sell for the same cover price as what I spent 2 years on.
Children's picture books are a brutally competitive market. It will chew you up and spit you out. I've done one, it sold nothing. So it broke even actually, and I think I made about 500 quid out of it, which is better than probably 99% of children's picture books that get published. I think there's some ridiculously high figure of children's picture books that gets published every year, because the amount of people who think anyone can do it. Because I'm so close to children's literature, because I've spent the last 6 years reading it every day, there's some really, really good stuff out there. Like the quality of the top end is fantastic, and the difference between a children's picture book that works and one that doesn't is massive. If you're going to get into that, I would say Julia Donaldson, who I think is probably Premier League in this country, was a singer-songwriter, and in fact she's a professional songwriter for the BBC before she started writing children's books. And I think if you want to write a children's picture book that works, learn to write a song first.
What about the creation and the printing process for the interactive books, the workbooky stuff? Is it literally just a book with blank spaces and it could be printed off KDP or print on demand? Or special binding, special paper, special presentation?
It relies on economies of scale, I would say. If you try and make money out of interactive books using print on demand, I think you will rapidly find that your profit is tiny, and perhaps tinier than if you had a deal with a publisher. As soon as you look at doing something that's non-standard size or on those kind of platforms, you're immediately like your profit per unit is shrinking and you've got no kind of wiggle room. Like as soon as you put a book on Amazon, they want to slash its price by 50%. It's so difficult to rig it up in such a way that you make more than pennies per title.
Your team sort of does its own printing. You manage the distribution to different countries and different fulfillment centers, and you just built a full traditional publisher.
Effectively, yeah. It's taken years to get to a position where it is profitable. There's a lot of sharks involved in the supply chain, and there's a lot of bad relationships out there, and you've got to kind of build the good relationships and avoid the sharks. It's not an easy process at all. Print on demand, I think, is great for some types of books, but there's a lot of stuff on Amazon that does do that just goes, right, I'm going to do an interactive book. Then there are now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of titles that are, Dad, tell me your story, an autobiography workbook, and then it's literally like blank pages with a one-liner in the middle that's come from some print on demand. It don't feel quality. I've got my mum's book done with Ingram Spark, and it's nice enough, but you can tell that it's not traditionally published.
What gives you your edge on this category of books? What's been allowing you to nail it multiple times in a row?
I think I learned at some point that you could use writing to make people feel good about themselves. For a long time, I was using writing to provoke thought and make people think. And then I started thinking about using writing to make people feel good about themselves. And that is working, is you are fascinating, your life is fascinating, and I'm going to encourage you and excite you about demonstrating that through a process. It works as a gift concept because it says from one person to another, I think you're fascinating. You could use writing to make people realize that actually they are the main character in their own story and not just an audience to everyone else. There's a kind of inadvertent therapeutic aspect to it that I hadn't even really thought about much, but it is that finding a tone that says like everyday life itself is endlessly rich and fascinating as you experience it, and the way you experience it is different to everybody else. So here is a process for you to kind of record your perspective in some way. That's that everyone is an artist kind of idea. That's been fundamental to me. Like you must create is one of our slogans as a publisher.
The hardest part is like, how do I get people to do what they read? I just love everything you're saying. It lines up so so much. What is your writing process? Are you working on A4 paper, longhand, drawing out pages? Do you write it as prose and then expand it later into an interactive or workbook form? Like,
the project that I'm currently working on is called My People, and it is a time capsule for your friends. Ostensibly targeted at school leavers, but it will not say that it's targeted at school leavers because I wanted to broaden it up to potentially other audiences. In my mind, the ideal user is 15, which is perfect because my tutor group is 15 and I can show them ideas and test them on them. So that's how this particular process has started. I've had a conversation with the publisher a few times on the phone, actually. We have our own initial ideas about scope. It's kind of a compositional mode of writing where almost like you're composing poetry when you're doing short copy rather than prose. I feel it is a bit kind of like writing poetry in the sense that you're sort of composing, writing a little bit, tweaking, writing a little bit, refining, trying to pull out the most clear and potentially powerful way to communicate a thing to a specific audience that you have in mind. I wrote a whole bunch of different titles and taglines and subtitles and showed them to my tutor group. And again, this is inspired by reading your book a couple of weeks ago. I got them to rank them and then give me feedback. So then I have 5 beta readers telling me that they would use it and telling me why they would use it, telling me how they would use it and telling me what they would expect to see in it. And then suddenly I was able to change the brief from this is going to be a book where a teenager is going to get like 50 different people from their secondary or high school to write in there. It's kind of like a yearbook. But then talking to real teenagers, it was like, well, no, we hate everyone. We only like 4 people. These 4 people here are the only people in the world that we want to talk to. No, I'm not going to go over there and try and get that person to write in my book. It's literally going to be only my closest friends. And then suddenly that's radically changed the design of the book because now I'm not writing a book for 50 people to contribute to. I'm writing a book for 4 people to contribute to over a longer period of time. That to me is like, well, I'm sold. This is how I do everything from now on because we've just been throwing bricks over a wall and hoping they hit someone. And we've had a higher success rate than many, probably because we've just published them so fast. So we've thrown more bricks over the wall than most people, and therefore we've had a higher hit rate. But now it's like I've just avoided writing a book that might look fantastic on the surface, but actually functionally not work for the end user and then not get the recommendation loop that it should have had. Just in one conversation with a bunch of kids.
You know, I love to hear that.
One of the things that I write on is positive conversations and telling positive stories. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations?
People are busy and people hate doing hard work and people hate thinking. So any way you can reduce barriers or remove barriers to them interacting with your book in a meaningful way is going to be great. And generally what helps is structure. So you narrow down their range of choices. When I write a question book that was literally just a book of questions, you'll tend to find that most of the time, most people just want to answer the questions that require least of them. And then every now and again, when they're feeling inspired or particularly inspired or motivated, they might go, you know what, no, I'm going to do the bigger thing and come up with a longer form answer, a more meaningful answer to a particular question or do something creative. But doing something creative is hard. And most of the time people are tired. So if you want to get people to do something creative in your book, I think it's a combination of giving them super easy access points. So like some tasks that are literally just tick this box, building up towards kind of suckering them in to make a more long form creative response to tell me a story. Or if you want them to tell you a positive story about something, you structure it. Give me one sentence that describes the beginning of this story. So you're kind of breaking it down for them as much as possible and kind of holding their hand. But then on top of that, you need to spend quite a bit of time telling them that they're brilliant and amazing and wonderful and exciting. And that sometimes will just carry them through to make the creative contribution that you want to make.
Is there a danger of talking to a small group of people and then making big changes and actually they may not be representative? A larger scale of 1,000 people or something might be a lot better than 5.
We're going from having no end user feedback at all to having some end user feedback. That's going to have a very significant degree of impact compared to having some user input to some more user input. There are completely different ways of thinking about producing a thing. And I think that large scale market research is out of reach for independent publishers for various reasons. Unless you've already got an incredible platform, how are you going to conduct large scale market research? And B, I think large scale market research can tend to make end products vanilla and can potentially be open to some of the same risks that focus groups are open to in a way, particularly as when you're constructing like the kind of research process that you use with a larger data set, you could get that wrong. You can get that wrong just as easily you could sort of overgeneralize a conversation with a couple of different people. I think there's risks to both. I think that I don't need a huge range of input. I just need a few real teenagers to look at what I'm writing and tell me whether or not it's rubbish. I don't have to talk to the same people all the time, and I can try to talk to a range, but I am specifically only talking to people that are interested in books.
We talked to an acquisitions editor from MIT Press, Jeremy Matthews, and he said they use both directions of research or understanding. So when they're looking for books on spec, they're basically completely market and trend driven. They go, this is really big right now, or the timing for an innovation around fusion is big, or like Tesla has made batteries a big topic. And then they seek out any credible author who can write on that topic, because that's very mass market driven, right? They're like big data. This is a global trend. A lot of people are going to be searching for this. But then they also do a bottom up approach where they say this individual researcher has something really interesting to say. And they commit to it even in the absence of market research. And they say that having both is quite valuable because they get at different corners of the market. Like you were saying, Patrick, where one is the mainstream, likely to be successful, but also likely to be highly competitive. And the other is more likely to be ignored. But when it sticks, it's the only book in this category and it's a big thing. So there's virtue on both sides. And particularly for books, Richard, I always do the Amazon keyword research, the competitor research, this stuff, but it's not going to stop me from writing a book. It's just going to tell me if there is some giant pool of untapped organic demand, which then I'll try to orient my sale to catch a bit of that uplift. I can tell you, no one was searching for the mom test. And I think that small groups, there's like a logarithmic curve to what you learn, where the first 5 conversations, everyone is like a mind-blowing explosion of insight. And at a certain point, you're sort of like, I heard it all before. That doesn't mean the market demand is there. But if you already believe in the market demand, it can really help you hone the product.
It's like when you start doing research, you think, oh, this is brilliant. I'm never going to have to make any more decisions. I'll just get other people to tell me what to do. But then you realize that, no, you're going to have to go through the creative process anyway. And it's going to be as individual and flawed and messy as any creative process is. You can't take the risk out of it, really.
Yeah. Books are hard. Books are hard. So you've been basically a professional writer for 13 years now. Some big hits, some big flops by your own description. I'm not judging you there. If you're advising someone who is starting out they're early in their writing career or they're advanced in their career, would you give an advice around the habit and kind of the self-management, and maybe an advice around the product, or like understanding a book is a thing?
I don't know when I learned to self-manage, because it's not something that ever came naturally to me, but everyone is going to have their own set of triggers that works for them as an individual. And external accountability or deadlines in my early career worked for me. Even if it's a self-produced project, get a deadline. And in terms of understanding that a book is a product, I think it takes a lot to get over the initial imposter syndrome. I think start with your product design. Start with product design rather than half an idea in 20,000 words. And that's advice that I got from a course that I went on, actually, that did change the way that I approach books. Was you start with a cover, start with a sales pitch, like you would any other type of product design. Start with your one-liner, read about copywriting, because whatever type of writer you want to be, you are going to have to do copywriting.
That is good advice. So let me throw your books up here and I'll try to appear behind them so everyone can see. Patrick's most recent book is This Is My Life Story. Is that the one you would recommend?
You have definitely got someone in your family who needs this book as a gift. It's a brilliant way to say, I want to celebrate your life. It will help people who are not writers to structure their anecdotes and their memories to produce an autobiography in a very short space of time.
That's this one here. I'll make it big and easy to see. Do you share anywhere online that if we want to follow you, learn more from you, be a fan? Is there a way to do that?
No, I have absolutely no social media presence at all.
What a heroic stance in this modern day and age.